just to try and keep it easy for you. Is that first phase Prop 1A compliant as you envision it?
No.
And why not? Because those then are the challenges that I want us to focus on.
Well, this is, in my opinion, that is not Prop 1A compliant, and that's why I've now implemented some actions since our last meeting, because I need to do some further analysis of the engineering interpretation of Prop 1A. And this is the interpretation by which we as a team have been working for the last years since Prop 1A was put into place. For instance, in Prop 1A, there are various issues which need such legal interpretation, but in particular the one I would like to just point out to you is the clarification regarding interpretation of 2704.09E, which says that it's necessary to carry, which is necessary to carry this blended system any further. That is, I've requested written advice from the AG's office about this, what they call transition or bypass requirement of stations. We discussed it at the last meeting, if you recall, which I see as a critical point to be able to meet the blended solution. Again, Prop 1A calls for this capability to transition intermediate stations or to bypass these stations at mainline operating speeds. Now, a person that comes from the industry like myself understands what the intent is of that clause. And that is that when high-speed trains, they should have the ability to transition a stationary train when parked in a station, so that you can ensure that the high-speed train service is not negatively impacted under these conditions. And this is standard design for criteria for high-speed rail systems around the world, and to ensure the safe, correct, optimal, efficient, reliable transportation system. And I believe that this has been put into Prop 1A as a condition because it's a logical condition, it's a logical design parameter for a high-speed rail system. To do that on the peninsula would require a tremendous amount of work because it more or less means that you have to put 4 tracks in the stations, and as you know, there are 26 stations or something along the corridor. And therefore, that is just one of various of these things that I'm, at the moment, having the AG's office look at and give me, because finally we need to get Prop 1A bond funding. And of course, I also have to consult with my FRA colleagues, because the other part of the funding, as I mentioned to yourselves, and in particular on the request of Senator Lowenthal last time, we're talking about $18 billion of federal funding. So it also has to meet the federal requirements. And I know that they're also looking at Prop 1A because they say the two should match each other. So this is typically one that we have to really look at because I do not believe that we're going to meet that if we do a blended system. And of course, the other one, Senator, that we did discuss the last time as well, it's not necessarily Prop 1 related, but it is very important for our consideration. And that is, I have requested Caltrain, and it was in a letter I also submitted to yourself, but I have now requested Caltrain myself to immediately undertake the capacity modeling for the present track configuration, as well as any rather easier bypass alternatives that could happen on the peninsula. It's important to determine what the capacity is of the today relatively 2-track
Mr. Van
solution.
Forgive the interruption.
Yeah.
It is important to determine what the capacity is, but after 2 years of requests from the California State Legislature to get ridership numbers that we can believe in have gone unanswered, that one's a little bit hard to take, quite frankly.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, although I would like to slightly differentiate, Senator, between a ridership, and I'm not saying it's not important, and throughput.
Well, let me just make the suggestion that capacity is not unrelated to ridership projections.
I agree.
We're talking about what level of demand is likely to exist, and then what level of capacity exists. The two are inexorably interwoven. And, you know, as I mentioned when Senator Lamalfa was in front of the Transportation Committee earlier this week, this is not simply concern expressed by members of the legislature. This is the peer review group. This is the Institute for Transportation Studies at Berkeley. This is the Legislative Analyst's Office. This is the Inspector General, and this is the Auditor of the State of California. So, frankly, I value the capacity estimates that you've referenced. I just wish we were seeing the same commitment to generating ridership projections that the committee and the members of the legislature could rely on.
Senator, in the High-Speed Rail Transportation Committee, at the time chaired by Senator Lowenthal, you recall that I have put together a peer review group for ridership, and I can advise you that if you must have received yesterday, today, whatever, the legislative peer review letter that they sent to you as well, which is a report of their last meeting with me or with us on was April the 1st. They have agreed that what we are doing to ensure that the ridership numbers are going to be secure is the right way forward. So I just wanted to say, we are working. I told you that. It's going to be part of the business plan. We are working on securing those numbers. There's no indication whatsoever at the moment that what's been done up to now is fatally flawed. And therefore, I hear you, but there's still a difference between having capacity that means a number of trains and number of passengers. They are linked, but they're linked in both directions.
So your statement today, which in my view, and again, we'll just go back and look at the tape, is different from your statement last week. But your statement today is that that such a system, such a blended system, would not be Prop 1A compliant. Did I hear you correctly?
Correct.
All right. So now,
that's my interpretation, and that's why I'm going for.
And that's why we're having the conversation. That's why we're having the conversation.
That's why I'm going for legal advice. I'm not a lawyer.
We're going to keep having these conversations until we can sort these issues through. But let me just be clear. What that means is that if you said earlier, yes, we have a first phase. Yes, we expect it to take something on the order of a decade. Yes, we expect it to be something on the rough order of $1.5 billion. And so, so what I've heard today is that, as of today, your view is that high-speed rail between San Jose and San Francisco will spend $1.5 billion over the course of a decade to not be compliant with Prop 1A.
No, because we would only.
Well, Mr. Van Ark, that's just what you told us. You said a decade. You said $1.5 billion. You said it wasn't compliant.
No, Senator, because you recall that we said that before we can build anything on the peninsula, we have to get a Prop 1A compliant CEQA clearance.
So your view is that after a decade, you will have spent $1.5 billion for a project which is not Prop 1A compliant, but which is on the path to Prop 1A compliance 25 years out.
Well, it depends on whether you believe it's 25 years, but it's a phased implementation.
Okay, let me try it again because I want us to get this right. So your view is, as of today, that we would spend over the course of a decade $1.5 billion to develop a project which was not Prop 1A compliant, but which was on the path towards Prop 1A compliance over the course of the subsequent 1 to 15 years thereafter.
I believe that the system that we have to build has to be Prop 1A compliant.
By when, sir?
But can be built in phases.
By when does it have to be Prop 1A compliant according to Prop 1A? You have your legal counsel with you. If she wants to weigh in, I'm happy to hear it. But because what I'm hearing is 10 years, $1.5 billion, and as of that date, not yet Prop 1A compliant. And I think what I heard you say is, as of that date, it's not Prop 1A compliant, but that at some point in the future, thank you, that at some point in the future it might be or the goal would be to have it be Prop 1A compliant. Ms. Aitchison.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Let me just clarify for the record, so I'm quoted appropriately, that I'm the environmental attorney. I'm not the bond expert. But my understanding of Proposition 1A is that it doesn't have timing requirements save those associated with the funding plan. So that is something that could also be clarified with the folks in my office who are more expert in this arena than I am.
So how do we know if anything is ever Prop 1A compliant if there's never a timing requirement? And I don't want to be misunderstood here, so just as last week's discussion shouldn't have led anybody to believe that I thought a single train was a desirable goal, let me be clear that what I'm about to say is to make the point and not to make the suggestion. So does that mean, Ms. Aitchison, that if $1.5 billion is spent over the course of the next decade to do the first phase of the phased implementation, and that is not Prop 1A compliant, which in and of itself, Mr. Van Ark, you've said today, it would not be, that if someone wants to say with a straight face, we'll finish it up 100 years from now, that they can make the case that they're still Prop 1A compliant because there's no time deadline?
I'm not sure I can answer that question specifically. You know, moving out 100 years, the authority is charged with the planning, design, and construction of a high-speed rail system that meets certain design requirements. And those design requirements, you know, being Prop 1A compliant, are what needs to be studied in the environmental document.
But I thought I heard you use the word implementation just now, did I?
Yes, and I apologize. I don't have the statute in front of me, but it's the planning, design, it's either implementation or construction.
Well, let me just say both to legal counsel and to the authority, if, you know, a great deal of attention has been brought to bear on the issue of Prop 1A compliance and the necessity for compliance, and I think that's entirely appropriate, just to be clear. But you kind of can't have that one both ways. I mean, what we're talking about is spending $1.5 billion over the course of a decade for a project you describe as not yet Prop 1A compliant at that time, but then I further hear that there's no clarity about, you know, whether it ever has to get there or whether, you know, there is essentially no deadline for that. Ms. Aitchison, if that's incorrect, please, again, help get us struck right away.
I'll do my best here, and I fear that I'm not going to fully answer your question, and I apologize for that. But the authority has to continue to plan for a Prop 1A compliant system, and that's what it is required to study in its environmental documentation. And I do not believe, now I'm not studying this as I speak to you, but I do not believe in the Bond Act there are specific time requirements for accomplishing that, but that has to remain the authority's position, that it is planning for a system. And so that is something that, again, the folks in our office who are delving into these issues could look at more clearly and more deliberately.
Okay. So I thought that was a helpful and important expression. So that has to continue to be their position, meaning as long as they continue to maintain that that's their end goal, then the issue is moot, really. I mean, what does as long as they continue to maintain that that's their position?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I apologize.
Well, what I heard you say just a minute ago, and forgive me if I don't get the precise 3 or 4 words, is that because there isn't an end date, that as long as the authority has to maintain the position that they will eventually get to Prop 1A compliance. Is that what I heard you? I think that's what I heard you say.
I don't want to hair split here, but what I'm trying to express...
Not in my case, you definitely don't, ma'am. So.
What I am trying to express is our view that the authority has a statutory obligation to deliver a system compliant with the statute. Not that it is going to say it's going to, but not do otherwise, but that it has to continue to move toward full compliance with that statute by designing a project that meets the requirements of the statute, which, again, Mr. Van Ark has asked our office to clarify, and I don't want to weigh into specifics. I'm not able to do that here today. But that is their statutory obligation, to deliver a system that's consistent with Proposition 1A.
But is there any deadline at all?
Again, I can do my best and look through here, but my best recollection is that there is not.
Okay.
I may be wrong.
Mr. Van Ark, you think that there is no deadline at all?
I believe there's no deadline, and I would just like to correct, of course, I know you used it as an example, the 10 years and $1.5 billion, but of course it's the intent of the authority to build what is necessary to be built, depending on the funding stream. So it's not as if we have the intent of putting in $1.5 billion only in the project but to prepare ourselves for a phased implementation approach.
And I want to get to Mr. Umberg in just a second. I want to let you confer with Mr. Belganar. But you had on your agenda today, and I didn't hear, help me, did you take it up earlier today, the phased implementation, or is that coming up later in the day?
We did take up the phased implementation with our board, you mean? Yes.
And the phased implementation has what I'm going to call colloquially a first phase.
Phased implementation will have many phases, of which there is always a first phase, yes.
Good.
Yes.
That's good. We can find some common ground on that. And is that the phase that gets us to this $1.5 billion number that's in the ballpark? Okay.
The phase, what we've asked the board for is that they give us the go-ahead to start the work on looking at phased implementation. So I can't tell you if it's $1.5 billion or maybe it's $4 billion, but we're having to look at logical sequencing of the work that'll, over time, give us more and more capacity and not block any developments. I gave you the example the last time of a house. If you build a house with a basement, you've got to put the basement in first before you build a house on top of it. So these are the things that...
And I gave you the example of the 400-unit apartment project, which could come in two phases of 200 units, or you could just decide, you know what, 200 units is all we're going to build, and therefore that's all we're going to do an EIR on. And I think where we are is in the conversation about whether or not we're ever going to see the additional units or the additional phases. And let me ask the question this way. How long and how much does it take to get the phase up and get the project up and running to the level that you have described in previous hearings of using high-speed rail authority trains running on an upgraded Caltrain? Because you have said that is consistent with your phased approach.
We do not have the figure, Senator. Again, that is what we requested the board to further investigate today. That is the next phase. I explained to you the last time that the decision to put the Arrow money into the Central Valley was a recent decision. Then at our previous board meeting, we launched the idea of phased implementation, and we're going to be looking at phased implementation on this particular section of the alignment as well as on the section from LA to Anaheim.
Thank you. Mr. Umberg, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Senator. I'm reluctant to enter the fray, but you've asked a very important question. The question is with respect to what are the time parameters? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know it's an important question that you should know and we should know. And so rather than, for example, having an answer provided here as we sit, I would just ask that we be given time to study that, and maybe you want to study it as well, your staff, so that we can come to a common understanding, because if we don't have a common understanding, it's going to create additional challenges, I think, for quite some time. So that would be my request.
Yeah. Let me. That's fine. We'll take the time to look. Let me say I'm disappointed in today's conversation. I thought we made some real progress last week, and what I hear today is essentially a backtracking on that conversation, and I think that's unfortunate. And we'll pick it up next time. Let me just say, Mr. Van Ark, I'm sure from your staff, and I suspect that your authority members know, we had a bill that we heard in this very committee that Senator LaMalfa offered to just essentially turn off the funding spigot for high-speed rail. I voted against that measure earlier this week. Senator Lowenthal voted against that measure as a member of the Transportation and Housing Committee earlier this week. Because we both said that we continue to support high-speed rail done right, and we've both tried to define what that might look like. But if the authority persists in pursuing an approach which involves 60-foot viaducts up and down the peninsula from San Francisco to San Jose, which involves, without the consent and desire of local communities, Mr. Van Ark, to give you that point, to push itself outside the boundaries of the existing Caltrain right-of-way, and to pursue a EIR for a project which may never get built, in my judgment probably shouldn't get built, and for which ridership studies, frankly, are unpersuasive, and that essentially leaves a sword over the head of the businesses and residents up and down that 50-foot corridor, then I'm going to be pretty hard-pressed to support that effort going forward. So I want to encourage you today to try and find again that common ground that we started to find last week. Because, as I say, I thought last week was a good step forward, and I think today is a step back on that front. Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, I have a number of questions I'd like to
Please. Senator Lowenthal, I also just,
Yes, why don't you finish?
I apologize because just one more thought. Yes, it's about all of those things, but if we're looking at an order of magnitude, back to Senator Fuller's point earlier today, of $1.5 billion versus $6 billion, rough order of magnitude, Senator Fuller, the response that you got earlier today from Mr. Van Ark on your issue and why the evaluation of an alternate route was because it, quote, will save us a huge amount of money, end quote. Well, $4.5 billion, the difference between $1.5 billion and $6 billion, is a huge amount of money as well. And if we can create a blended system that integrates high-speed rail with a 21st century Caltrain up and down this corridor and save $4.5 billion that we don't have, it seems to me that would be worth pursuing with equal vigor.
Senator, if I may, I agree. We agree with that. The thing is, as I mentioned to Senator Fuller, I mean, the alternative going down the Grapevine will meet Prop 1A. And as we agreed at the last meeting, and when you closed at the last meeting, you said that we must meet Prop 1A. I mean, we have agreement that we need to meet Prop 1A. I'm trying to get legal advice on certain parameters of Prop 1A as to whether we're meeting those, and getting some advice on capacity planning, which is whether the ridership is right or wrong. Capacity planning just means, can I get a train in there or not? That's really the question.
I think it's one thing to say...
Then we can move forward on this issue.
I think it's one thing to say we need to meet Prop 1A. I think it's another to use Prop 1A as the vehicle by which you avoid addressing legitimate concerns raised up and down the state. And if Prop 1A continues to be the vehicle by which the authority avoids coming to grips with those legitimate concerns, then you may see legislative action as a necessary consequence, either to deal with the matter statutorily or to place a revision on the ballot. And let me just say, that doesn't help your interest in terms of moving the project forward. People came and testified against the Lamalfa bill, suggesting that it was problematic, and I thought there was even a hint that it was inappropriate of the senator to introduce his bill because it might chill the environment in which we move forward. Great. If you don't want to see that kind of action, then we need you to step up and start solving problems and not putting more impediments in the way of people who are trying to get to yes with you. Senator Lowenthal.
Thank you. What struck me, the reason I'm following up these questions now rather than earlier is because just as this meeting began, and during this meeting, which I have not, I received a 6-page letter that was sent, CC'd to my office, that was sent to you regarding the peer review committee. So I haven't had a chance to read it, so I may ask questions that are in this. This just arrived as we're speaking. But I have some issues because we've been asking about this. You do recall the letter that Senator Steinberg, let me just make sure, that Senator Steinberg, Senator Simidian, Senator DeSaulnier, and I wrote to you regarding you included in the next business plan important questions about the project. You recall that?
Yes.
And you also recall that in March, I think it's the 22nd of March, you responded to the questions we raised as, I believe the quote was, these are the right ones that must be answered by the authority, right? And I think that the questions that were originally raised by the peer review group and maybe responded in this letter, I'm not sure because we haven't had a chance to read this letter, are those right ones? Is that not so? So we're talking about the questions and that these are the right questions, right?
My recollection, Senator, is the first letter you referenced that came from the senators to the authority requested that those issues that the peer review group queried should be incorporated in the business plan.
That's right. And you responded, those are the right questions, right? So that's really what I'm saying.
And you are correct with your second statement, too. And I, too, only received this report yesterday.
So I'm going to ask you questions that may also be in this, but
Yeah.
I've been planning on
So
this.
the report apparently, although I looked very quickly at it, that we received yesterday from the peer review group, the new report, references the same points as the last one.
Right.
But it, of course, is an update of the last one.
Right, and we haven't
Because
had
they have had a subsequent meeting with us.
Right,
Yes,
and
exactly.
that's really what I want to understand. First, the questions, what that process is. What is, with a description of your current process for reviewing these questions that are outlined in the letter? Do you meet regularly with the peer review? It'd be really helpful for us to understand what the process is, how you're going to, how you are planning to review the questions that we raised in the peer review, for us to understand what is the authorities going, how are they going to review and deal with these issues is the first question.
Well, as you know, the peer review group is a legislative peer review group. So
That's
they were
right.
appointed by yourselves, and they do not report to us. They have they have the choice and decision as to when they want to have meetings with us. And we have had 2 official meetings with the peer review group, the second being on the 1st of April. They are full-day meetings. They do full-day, you can say, audits of the project status. I find them to be very constructive. I find that the members that have been chosen for the peer review group as being very capable and professional people. Unfortunately, not all the positions have been filled.
Right, we know that.
But on the other hand, I think the people are very knowledgeable about the type of business that we're involved in here.
I don't believe all of the members even have been able to meet with you, the ones that have been.
Not all at the same time.
That's
You're
right.
Yes.
That's right.
But still, I really appreciate that team, and I also really would like you to read the report, because they are. I know you are going to do it.
We are going to read it, but it's very hard as the report arrives,
Yes, I know that.
as we're having this conversation.
And even I haven't, because it just arrived yesterday.
Absolutely, and we will, because that's the question. Because really,
But there are
asking,
serious issues in there, related to issues like staffing, as you know, like things that we have to resolve, and we are busy resolving.
Could you
now.
share with us a little bit what are the key issues that so far have been raised, and what's next, and how you're, I understand we didn't ask you to do this, but it would be very helpful for us to understand how that process and what are the issues in your meetings have been raised, and how are they being addressed, and what information can you provide to us about that?
I think the one main concern that's number one, and was number one on the last report from the peer review too, was the level of staffing of the authority. I reported at the last meeting, you asked me about that. We have 19 people today. Of the 19 people, are more or less the only one with experience in a mega project of this type. And if you want to do not outreach, if you want to do oversight and management of a project of this type, you need many more people with that experience.
What about some of the other issues that were raised in terms of the business plan, the financial plan?
On the business
Have you begun
plan,
to address those?
Yes.
Those are critical issues for us to understand where they are.
On the business plan, you'll see some positive statements made regarding the business plan. They are aware of the fact that the business plan is due on the 14th of October, but we did discuss with them aspects of the business plan.
And they will be included in that business plan, some of the review,
Yes,
the statements?
yes. But we have, to be really honest with you, we are very much on the same page with respect to what the business plan, what the direction should be on a project like this. And again, I say the people that are on the peer review group are people that have built these type of projects before and have had that type of experience.
So you would describe, so if you're on the same page, that your relationship with the peer review committee is one of constructive dialogue between
Constructive
the two.
dialogue, tough, hard, straight, but really
Any
good.
tough issues that have come up that really have not been, that we need to hear about? And just preliminarily, in a preliminary form, I realize that we're asking you to give us by October some of the business plan, which I'm sure will include some of this interaction between the business.
I think there are a few issues. One I mentioned, and that is that
the staffing.
The staffing. The other one is that they feel that what we've done to ensure the stability and the correctness of the ridership numbers is the right way forward, and that the organization and the peer panel that we selected was the right type of way to do this type, to do that for a mega project of this type. I believe they were a bit critical on the implementation of some risk management that we need to do between now and beginning of construction. But all in all, you would do best to look at both reports, the previous one and this one, and see the the enhancement and the move forward.
As the project is unfolding, as we're learning more about it, as we're learning more about the funding, as you work on this on the business plan, which you will get, try to respond. I think these questions will be hopefully answered in October 1. You must be learning much more about the kinds of public-private partnerships that may be involved, because as we all know, that term encompasses a huge range, and it's going to be very important for us in the legislature to kind of understand what that really means, what it means in terms of decisions that are going to be made by the High-Speed Rail Authority. We talked about some changes up here in terms of alignment or questions. I'm sure that public-private partnership may also, by its very nature, as we understand it, not because of anybody's, will change some things also. And it's really critical that we understand how that unfolds.
Just that you're aware of it, we had the RFEI conference. I think I've mentioned to you that before. We had about 2,000 companies involved in this request for expression of interest. But we also had 22 groups of investors and serious groups that want to be part of this project as investors, as operators, as concessionaires. I had a big group in my office this week, 2 days ago, from Spain, the biggest basically in the world in this type of thing. They fund many American projects, but they also fund many European projects and get involved in them from an infrastructure development and funding point of view. There are quite a few. We've had meetings after the RFEI, and we continue to have meetings with these groups now as part of the business case. But let me also remind you, because I told you that last time, Senator, the peer review group also makes mention of the fact, of course, that federal funding is very important.
Absolutely, as we
federal
do too.
funding is one of the big aspects of this particular project.
And will determine also in part what kind of partnership you develop also.
Exactly.
I think that's really what and this is not a criticism of anybody. We're in a very loosey-goosey world at this moment in terms of knowing what types of commitments are out there, and that will have not only in terms of issues around compliance with 1A, but also how we move forward, and we just would like to make sure that whatever occurs in the business plan, the questions that we have asked you will be included in the bit, but some of these other issues also in terms of where will be, because it's critical that we know, and that is not a criticism. That is just to say that's the world we live in, and we need to have these answers so that we can be responsible for the oversight that we must do.
It's very important to work together with these probable future investors, because it is a big part of it, and they want to have. We have to prepare our project in a way that they will be the investors of the future in this project. But one of the biggest investors we must not underestimate, and I think we are aiming to build this system for the people of California. The people of California voted for it. But the biggest investor in this particular project is the DOT. And I think that you and we together should be working on the DOT
I could not agree more that there has to be a concerted effort, and we have to work together between the state of California, the legislature, the authority together to address our Department of Transportation and others both in the administration and in the Congress regarding where we are. Without that, we're just left with this tremendous question mark that's out there.
I agree.
And it's important, imperative that we do that together. I also just have, so I'm glad to hear that these questions will be addressed in the business plan, that you are working with the authority, that you have had workshops with the peer review group. But I want to raise a question that came up, just struck me as it came up earlier, in relationship to the question I asked you about building an interim terminal versus the Trans-Bay terminal. And then, and I didn't think about this until we had this discussion here about being compliant with 1A. Is building an interim terminal compliant with 1A?
No, because once again, it's not that we're building an interim. Everything we'll be building in phases is interim. The Forth and Kings is in any case a overflow station for Trans-Bay Terminal. So it is nominated that by Trans-Bay Terminal as well.
So the people at Trans say, okay, go on.
So Forth and Kings is today already a station. It is a Caltrain station today.
So what you're saying is that in this discussion about what is compliant with 1A and that you're really bound by 1A, you're saying that designing this
in phases.
Well, not only in phases, but spending which we don't know, a significant amount of money, which could be used for the Trans-Bay terminal, which you're now spending on someplace else, is compliant with 1A?
It's part of what we need to build at the end of the day.
I'd like to ask the attorney, is that compliant with 1A? That was never in the 1A.
I'm sorry, whether a station at Forth and King is compliant with 1A?
With 1A, when in fact, and we're not doing the build out to the Trans-Bay terminal, which was what was in Proposition 1A.
Well, let me just clarify.
And we're spending the money for that could be spent on 1A. Could be spent on Trans-Bay.
The Trans-Bay terminal is identified in the proposition
Absolutely.
as the northernmost terminus. Right. And with other stations along the alignment, the authority has discretion over to have a station or not have a station. And so I would hesitate to say not Prop 1A compliant in that it may be one of the stations along the way.
No, we're not talking about as one of the stations along the way.
To the exclusion of Trans-Bay, again, speaking preliminarily would strike me as problematic.
I would like to hear a discussion from the Attorney General, on that issue.
It's rare that I would presume to speak for Mr. Van Ark, but let me see if I can't try and get us to yes on this one. Based on the earlier conversation we had today, Mr. Van Ark, I think your team would say that Forth and King is on the path to compliance with Proposition 1A. And I think that's what your legal counsel was trying to clarify earlier. And I think that's been your position today with respect to some of the other improvements that we've talked about. Yeah. And so it's on the path to compliance, I think, is
It's a new term, the path to compliance.
Yes, that's well. For the record, I'm not one of the consultants to the authority, however, that's so.
We're always looking for good people.
So, thank you. Senator Lowenthal?
No, I'm just concerned that, we spend a lot of time talking about what's compliant with 1A and what's not, and I just need to understand whether these actions are compliant or whether they're on the path to compliance or they're maybe compliant.
I think Mr. Umberg counseled us wisely earlier, which is we really do sort of need to figure out what the time frame, horizon constraints are and focus in on that a little bit because, if there is no outer boundary to the project, that creates a lot of ambiguity, I think, and some interesting challenges. So.
And in conclusion, I will say that when you do return, it would be interesting to talk about the letter from the peer review since we haven't had a chance really to read that. And so that'll be...
Senator, just that you understand, or Chairman, Senator, you asked me last week, we were going to be presenting phase implementation at the board. You asked me whether there were going to be big decisions made. And I told you that was not the idea. So we presented it to the board today, but obviously with what's been in the press and what's been heard and what's been seen with respect to the difference between blended system and phased implementation, our board too has requested that we come back to them in a month's time to explain to them what we want to do, because it's clear that the board's also saying we don't want to spend money on something until we get clarity on it. So we have to get back to the board in a month's time, and in the meanwhile, hold back, obviously clarifying with some of these issues that we're looking at, legal issues, capacity issues and so on, and that we will be going back to our board as well, with the aim that we have some clarity then as to what the engineer should start working on.
Great. Let me, Mr. Balganorth, you've been silent, and that may have been by design, but I want to make sure that we didn't cut you out of the conversation. If you have observations you want to share before we wrap this up and let you get back to your business.
You really didn't cut me out of the conversation, but I do appreciate that. As a new board member, I'd just like to say one thing. It's my goal, and from what I can understand from everybody else there, to get this thing done in a expeditious manner that is both economical and in compliance with 1A. I think that it's, as I have expressed to you in the past and continue to express to you, we have and I think most people on the board feel the same way, we want to build a system that benefits California, but we want to do it in a way that's not great detriment to any community. So we're very interested, or at least I'm very interested in everything that you have to say about this, but I'm also interested in trying to come to a resolution that will move this along.
I am going to take public testimony in a minute. I'm going to ask folks to be mindful of the time constraints we're operating under for our entire calendar. That being said, I know a lot of folks put themselves to great effort to be here, so I want to try and respect that. Before we let folks step away from the table, Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah, I just want to make one statement that following up what I asked you about the peer review, that next Wednesday, I believe it's May 13th? No. 11th is Wednesday? If that's what it is, I believe at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 or 1:30 in the, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Senate Select Committee on High-Speed Rail will be reviewing the Kempton, the peer review report, and so we're going to have a discussion of that. And so the questions, we'll get a chance to review this also, and we will have Mr. Kempton there and to follow up on doing the peer review. So I just want to mention that.
All right,
and invite everyone to come.
May the 11th, that's 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock,
That's
peer
the
review.
Senate Select Committee on High-Speed Rail. All right. And we'll be back again next week in this budget subcommittee, looking forward to picking up the conversation a little further and focusing on some of these time constraint issues. Let me express a concern and then try and end on an upbeat note, if I can. I am disappointed that, in my judgment, Mr. Van Ark, the position you laid out today is a step back from where we were last week. We'll revisit what got said last week, and we'll see to what extent we can reconcile that. That being said, I appreciate the efforts that all three of you gentlemen made to be here with us today, as well as Ms. Aitchison, your legal counsel. And I think it's, as the conversation today with all three members of the committee suggests, there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of questions to be answered if this thing is going to move forward, as Mr. Balganorth suggests. So thank you for being here. Ms. Aitchison, thank you. I think under challenging circumstances, you continue to represent your client quite well while still responding to the questions from the committee. No small accomplishment, so good for you. I am delighted that we're going to be able to get an outreach plan for the region that is represented by Senator Fuller and other members. I know Senator Rubio has had concerns about the same set of issues, and I'm sure there are others in your region. So I think that will be helpful to everyone. And let me just say, and please share, these are my sentiments at least, with your board. I thought it was both a wise and appropriate response on the phased plan that was on your agenda today to say, let's hold off on that for a month while we have some further conversation between and among the parties. I think, call me an optimist, but I continue to believe if we keep hashing these issues out, that we may get to yes one day, and hopefully sooner rather than later. So then on that, let me just say thank you again, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Take care. Public testimony is appropriate this time, so if there are folks who want to comment on the high-speed rail issues that we've just heard about, obviously we're not going to be able to do a back and forth. That's not the intention, but if you're here and you care enough to come, we want to be sure we hear from you on these issues. Come on up and just take a seat at the table.
Am I the only one brave enough?
No, that's all right. This is... Thanks.
My name is Stacey Mortensen.
Ms. Mortensen, I need to ask you to pull the mic. There you go. It's up. Now that it's lit, it's on, so you're good.
I'm from San Joaquin County. I also oversee a rail service. I understand that our state is in a very dire economic situation, and we feel that all up and down the valley. But looking at the long view, I do see this infrastructure and this program as a way to leverage investment into California. And I think if we are going to spend money, we should spend it where it does some good and pulls in money from outside places. I also think it has a chance to leverage new industry into California, and we're bleeding industries. And I think it can't be understated that this has the opportunity to sprout up something completely new. With that said, I do appreciate as a taxpayer your hard-hitting questions to make sure this thing is done right. And on the flip side, as someone who has built something brand new, I can sympathize with the authority about answers not being known right out the gate and the environmental process needing to drag on before some of those things come to a close. So I think I can sympathize on both sides of the table, but I appreciate that you stay with it and that you allow us to support the authority in their efforts. And on the matter of public outreach, we have found that it's important to have a convener at the local level that gets both the pros and the cons on the table. It's unrealistic to expect a large state body could drive this information down to the locals like we need it to be. For us, it's farmers and water districts and tribal lands. The state is not capable at that level to really get that conversation going. And so I would encourage that convener agencies in each of the sections be designated and worked with. I mean, if we want this to work for us, we're going to have to put something on the table to try to make sure it does and get that conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Folks, the last witness did a very nice job of limiting herself to about 2 minutes. If we could ask you to do the same. And the encouragement I always give is if you have a single topic sentence that you can start with, if you remember topic sentence from high school English, that says, here is my topic sentence, what's the one thing you want to make sure that all three of us register from your testimony? That's often a helpful way to get there. Sir, you're next.
Yes. Good afternoon. Charles Volz. I'm from Burlingame. I'm a member of the CCHSR board, a retired attorney, and I want to commend the committee for trying to discuss and resolve the macro issues, the global issues statewide. But part of that was the comment from the new board member who said they don't want to do anything that's a detriment to any community, because ultimately for many communities along the right-of-way, what really counts is what impact it has on their community. And for Burlingame, there is strong opposition to an elevated viaduct. In my neighborhood, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of signs in people's front lawn that say, here comes high-speed rail, there goes my neighborhood, because they are afraid of an elevated train freeway that will be as wide as the Dumbarton Bridge going through our very sensitive commercial, residential, and beautifully tree-filled railways. Now, the disappointment I feel relates to the statement of Mr. Van Ork that said, well, there are some communities that want a viaduct, and we can all respect that, but we don't get the flip side that says where there is strong opposition to it, we're going to find another solution, although that was what the board member indicated would be the policy of the board. So I encourage this committee to address that in terms of what is the EIR going to do moving forward. Will it incorporate the three elements that your group with your colleagues has put forward? And I hope that will be the case, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next witness. Sir.
I'm David Schoenbrunn with Transdev. We're a party in the litigation with the authority. My topic sentence is we want to ask you to zero out funding for environmental and engineering work until there is a franchisee in place. This would provide the authority with the appropriate impetus to essentially get themselves focused on the people that they apparently met with this week and get somebody signed up who's willing to undertake this project and undertake the ridership risk. We believe that they probably will want to design their own route and certainly will insist on doing their own ridership studies. So we don't think it makes any sense for the state to continue putting money into Now they're starting to review alternatives that were eliminated for political or nefarious reasons earlier, and are being because of the finance are now starting to study again. That's good, but it ought to be that study ought to be done by an entity that is going to undertake the ridership risk. Okay. And I want to caution you about the politically challenging decision ahead, where you will all be asked to commit bond funds to a major Central Valley construction project. In the absence of a franchisee, we believe this project would be a massive waste of the state's scarce resources, because there literally would be no hope of ever building a system to connect it to. A train to nowhere would be a massive embarrassment to every legislator that authorized the expenditure of bond funds. We urge you in the future, when this does come up, and we saw those same forces testify against the LaMalfa bill, SB 22, we urge you to stand up to that throng of voices that will want the money spent and don't care whether it benefits the state or not. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next witness.
Mike Brady. I'm an attorney from Menlo Park. Blended implementation will not comply with Proposition 1A. You are now touching on one of the central issues. The FRA required the authority to go over to the Central Valley and start the project there. That was absolutely required. What are they going to do? They're going to have a conventional Amtrak system without electrification. Electricity is required under Proposition 1A. No positive train control system, conventional locomotives and cars. That does not comply with what the voters and what the legislature intended. We do not want an interim system. The people of California voted for a high-speed train system. The path to compliance will not work. The journey must be completed, meaning in the Central Valley.
Sir, if you could just lower your voice just
yes,
a little bit.
Surely.
Thank you.
In the Central Valley, they've got to complete a high-speed train system, and they can't start any place else in California until they complete it there. That's the least of what California expects. The LAO in the early days of these hearings said, no financial risk to the state. If you allow them to start in more than one place, serious financial risk to the state. But the planned implementation and the blended approach have to compliance, not comply with Prop 1A.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Chairman, members, thank you for the time to speak to you today. Daniel Kraus, Californians for High Speed Rail. I just wanted to touch on a couple points during this conversation. I actually, with all due respect, felt it was a little bit unfair to the authority and Mr. Van Ark. I just thought, given the fact that I believe and my organization believes the blended Caltrain high-speed rail approach actually doesn't meet Prop 1A, I really think the onus is on the sponsors of this proposal to prove or demonstrate, that it works.
Mr. Kraus, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to give you your full 2 minutes. In general, it's not my inclination to respond to public testimony, because I think you all ought to get the last word, and I'm going to give you the last word. But I want to be very clear on this. I waited 2+ years to get a plan from the High Speed Rail Authority that could be characterized as high-speed rail done right. I made that call quite clearly and quite specifically quite some time ago. And with the passage of time, nothing came forward. It is not the job description of any member of this committee to design high-speed rail. But finally, in the absence of any real counter offer from the folks at High Speed Rail, your patience just runs out, and you have to say to folks, look, as a state senator, a state assembly member, and a member of Congress representing collectively probably 1.5 million different people, here are some parameters that we think describe what high-speed rail done right looks like, because after the passage of time, nothing's forthcoming. So I understand now that the easy thing for people to do is say, well, we want you to design the project for us. That's not going to happen. What we're going to say is, this is what high-speed rail done right looks like, And we hope the High-Speed Rail Authority will now come back to us with a description of a project that fits those parameters. And I'm going to give you the last word because I think that's your right as a member of the public, but I do just want to be very clear about this. We stayed back quite a long ways for quite a long time. And I tried as one locally elected official to be an honest broker the way I gather my colleagues are trying to do in their areas and foster that discussion that the earliest speaker thought was important, because I thought, you know what, let's see if we can't get the conversation going. In my district, 15 months ago, in January of 2010, I convened an informational hearing which drew 500 people on a rainy night. And yet, with the passage of time, no response. So I hope you'll understand if I feel like I've been more than patient and more to the point that my constituents and the constituents of other members have been more than patient, and that at some point, when you see no change in direction, you simply are obliged to say, well, let us help provide some parameters for a restart, a new conversation. That's what we've tried to do. But I don't intend to be, as people have been reminding me lately, we have some other challenges here in the state of California. Designing high-speed rail can't be my job description. But what I can and think I do have to do is provide a framework for that discussion to be more productive than it has been over the last couple of years. Go right ahead, sir. And
thank you.
And just for the record, no, my comments don't count against your time, so not to worry.
Thank you. And I wasn't actually, just to clarify, I don't want to suggest that it's your job to design the high-speed project. That's obviously not something anybody should. It's not your role. So I guess what I was trying to get at is we're concerned as an organization about the parameters and to make sure that the parameters work, and so hopefully there's enough flexibility in this discussion so that maybe if the parameters are determined not to be feasible with Prop 1A, that we can negotiate and work the parameters out so it is workable. And also the phasing issue, we're really concerned about making sure that if phasing makes sense, that it's on the table. And we're a little concerned about the proposals kind of not wanting phasing whatsoever. So that's our main concern. And we're also, maybe it makes sense to take a step back and give the discussion more time to figure out these issues versus trying to get them all defined within the next month or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Hi, I'm Nadia Nayak from CARD, which is Californians Advocating Responsible Rail Design. For those who are not familiar, CARD is a grassroots volunteer organization that's been following the project. My topic sentence, I sort of have two. A blended system is good, and service plans drive infrastructure, so please require the authority to come up with a service plan. Since the announcement by Congresswoman Eshoo, Senator Simitian, and Assemblymember Gordon, we've been meeting with several rail experts on the feasibility of blended
systems. If I could ask you to slow down just a little bit, and I promise I'll give you an extra 15 seconds so we can follow what you're saying.
Thank you. Sorry, it's been a long drive. Based on our discussions, the proposal by Peninsula legislators is not only feasible but desirable. I know this committee and most of the people following this issue understand the importance of a reliable ridership study. Equally important, but not as well known as ridership, is the mantra that service plan drives infrastructure. The key to building good infrastructure is having a plan of what type of service is expected to run. The expected service plan determines things like how often trains run, the types of trains, where main stations will be, and even the type of parking that should be available at stations. A service plan is absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, the authority continues to put off the decision to bring in foreign operators that could shed light on the types of service plans that could be profitable. Without a service plan, we have a case of the tail wagging the dog, and this is no Chihuahua. We commend the legislators for taking a leadership position on this issue. Blended systems will affect not just the peninsula, but also the LA area and potentially save billions of dollars of unnecessary infrastructure costs. You're doing the right thing by trying to get the budget down to a reasonable amount so you can find the money to do things like Transbay and get to the LA Basin. We'd like to recommend that going forward you consider requiring service plans from the authority as part of their planning process to ensure we don't overbuild and waste taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Gentlemen, I'm not sure who's next, but I think the fellow with the microphone will probably be first, and then he'll hand it to the fellow who doesn't have the microphone.
Okay.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Roland Lebrun. I have no affiliation. I'd like to touch on a couple of topics. That's Transbay and ridership. On the subject of Transbay, I noticed with interest that the authority selected top tunneling expert with, worldwide reputation for the analysis of the tunnels in the Grapevine and I-5 area. And it would make sense to me to engage the same consultants to look at the tunnels between 4th and King and Trans Bay. Mr. Van Ark quoted, I believe, $2.5 billion this morning to do what is essentially, I think, is 1.3 miles of tunnels. I believe these people could possibly save you between $1 billion and $2 billion. That's my first suggestion. On the subject of ridership, since we don't have any numbers, I thought it might be useful to actually look at high-speed rail traffic in Europe, specifically between London and Paris as an example, and assume that London is St. Pancras is Trans Bay and Paris is LA, for instance. Currently, they're running 16.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to smile or interrupt you. You got some smiles with the comparisons.
I'm just making an assumption because these are numbers that I know I'm comfortable with. Okay, so we're looking at 16 trains in each direction a day. Okay, they're 60% full, so you're talking about 10,000 people going in each direction, right? Now, the same line also accumulates the trains to Brussels. I don't know how full they are. Based on what I know of Zaventem, they're probably fairly full. That's 10 trains in each direction. But that's only 25% of the capacity on that line, because the other 75% plus are used by commuter rail. And the basic problem we have with the High-Speed Rail Authority in terms of the shared alignment is that they have assumed that Caltrain would be carry on using the existing stock, and that's not at all what happened there. And the solution there has to be at looking at the kind of rolling stock that you're going to need to be able to achieve this. And one last point of all those, so the London to Brussels, London to Paris, and the commuter rail, all that stock is privately operated. And one very last point, the consultants I mentioned for the tunnels were also behind this entire operation of sharing real long-distance high-speed rail with commuter rail. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next witness, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Henry Perea. I'm a supervisor in Fresno County, co-chair of Fresno Works, working on high-speed rail in Fresno County and the Valley. My topic statement would be, we'll start off with, without vision, we're done. I'm paraphrasing that one. But really, I think...
the correct quote, where there is no vision, the people perish?
That's correct,
Thank
sir.
You.
Yeah. I just want to bring it, I wanted to bring it to modern day language.
All right, thank you.
Without no ridership.
Well, let's talk about that. And what I'm asking the state legislature and the governor to do is to carry through on the vision of the people of California who voted for this proposition and said we want high-speed rail. Now, we all know that the economic model for this was never to be 100% taxpayer-funded, combination of state, federal, local, and investment. We all know that. What I can tell you, having made a decision by the authority in selecting Fresno to, or just south Madera to Bakersfield for this leg of construction, has brought significant international interest to Fresno. I can't tell you how many countries we have hosted already in our community, giving them tours of the site, how much investment they're already talking about doing in the San Joaquin Valley, the types of land they're looking at to buy, and the billions of dollars they are specifically talking about investing in the next 6 to 9 months in this project. So is high-speed rail real? Absolutely, it's real. You know, there's an investment that's been made. The ground will be broken in the San Joaquin Valley next year. And when folks say it's a train to nowhere, you know, I kind of point you back to, you know, the Hoover Dam or any major infrastructure project in this country that we've seen. The day they built it, they didn't have every penny in the bank to build it, and they didn't finish it the next day. It's built in phases, just as high-speed rail will be built. So we're asking you, and if I understood the peer review committee correctly, that's a good idea. You know, there's no question that there are issues that you all have, and they need to be answered. There's a lot of communities that have questions in such a major infrastructure project. Those are legitimate questions that have to be dealt with, and I believe those will be bridged. Mr. Van Ark and his crew has been here for a short period of time. I get what you're saying about 2 years or more, because I think at that time people just weren't seeing the reality of it. But it's real now, and I think people are doing catch-up, and you deserve your answers, and I hope you get them. But the bottom line is this project needs to happen for California. I don't have to tell you about your budget or my budget and what we're dealing with and the cuts we're going to have to make. And there's not a lot on the horizon that's going to talk about economic benefit for this state. We need to put people back to work, and that's what we need your help in. And if we're seeing international investment coming down the pike and coming soon, then I think the questions of ridership and all that will be answered. Because obviously these aren't dumb people. They're not putting down their money because there's not a project here. So stay the course.
Thank you very much for your comments. Let's go from one side to the other with the remaining witnesses.
Mr. Chairman and Senators, thanks very much for giving us this time for the public to comment. I'm Gary Patton. I've written you a letter, which I don't have to rehearse here. I wanted you to take, and I still want you to take, a rather bolder approach to trying to do it right in California. I think the current direction is not going to get you there, and you really need to look at something like what Mr. Schonbrun was talking about, getting a real knowledgeable group in here to help the state plan and design and then implement ultimately, consistent with Prop 1A, a good system. I have another comment, which really, and the reason I got up here is to follow on the chairman's comments. AB 3034, which became Proposition 1A, started out through the legislature with everything going to the authority, all the money going to the authority, and the authority just making the decisions themselves, using their best judgment consistent with the proposition. The legislature changed that, and the people ratified what the legislature did. It put the legislature in charge of the project. You should not be apologetic. Certainly, you shouldn't be trying to plan the project in the subcommittee, but you should not be apologetic about demanding something that, from the legislative perspective, is done right financially and environmentally and for the benefit of the communities and for good transportation policy. Senator Samiti and the people that I'm working with closely on the peninsula applaud what you and Mr. Gordon and Anna Eshoo have laid out as a kind of minimum standard. Unless the community really wants it, you don't drive some high freeway-like elevated viaduct structure through the middle of their communities, and you stay within the existing right-of-way. And I think the committee and the subcommittee here should give that sort of as the direction to the High-Speed Rail Authority, as long as they're still in charge of the project, and tell them, look, you bring us something like that because we feel comfortable about funding that in this segment. And I think other senators in their areas need to take the same kind of approach, given to who you're working with.
Thank you very much. And thanks for staying within that couple-minute time frame.
Hi, this is Kathy Hamilton. I'm with CCHSR. I attended the meeting this morning at the High-Speed Rail Authority, and Mr. Van Ark did say that the board decided to put off any discussion on the San Jose-San Francisco route until later. But what he didn't tell you was that they were concerned that this was smoke and mirrors to fund Caltrain, and they are also going to ask for a Attorney General's opinion on if they can substitute possibly a Phase 2 city for a Phase 1 and sort of, let us off the hook for a while. But I just wanted you to know that there was considerable discussion this morning about the motives behind what the proposal initially was. The thing I wanted to tell you was I'm very concerned about this on the path of compliance. I've heard this story before, and I don't think it's what the people wanted in 1A. At what point is compliance going to be the law? The initial building segment, usable segment, they have said that what they're going to begin to construct in the Central Valley is not a usable segment, but they're on their way to get it. They even gave it something, special initials, initial building site or something like that. And that's not what 1A says. I'm also concerned that they'll use that same tactic with revenue guarantees, which is clear as a bell. Well, it isn't clear as a bell, but the fact is this is not the promises that were made to the people were to do a plan that followed the law fiscally and responsibly, and I think you should question this path of compliance because I think it's smoke and mirrors. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I think this is our final witness, yes?
Yes, and I will be brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Ravi Mehta appearing on the behalf of the cities of Atherton, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, and Pico Rivera. First, on behalf of our cities, thank you for being stalwart, for the stalwart oversight of the High-Speed Rail Authority, and more importantly, for your fortitude in doing what's right and good for all of the state of California. My topic sentence is ridership. I think you've heard it from others. The High-Speed Rail Authority continues to spend on a daily basis. They continue to change, as they did with the I-5 corridor, on a continual basis. They seem to have lots of money for these changes based on what they believe is right for them. Ridership is the key. The longer we wait, the longer it's going to take. It's going to take about a year, year and a half. I asked this committee to mandate that before they get any funding, that they do a ridership study and that they get started now. Because it is important, because we're continuing to spend millions, if not billions of dollars that may literally be thrown out the door. So that is my topic sentence, and I'd ask this committee to mandate that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other witnesses on this subject? All right. If not, that completes the topic of high-speed rail for today. All right. Thank you. I could see that one coming. Members, we have quite a bit of work left to do. I am going to say let's take just a 5-minute break, and a 5-minute break really does mean a 5-minute break. That's not a legislative standard time 5-minute break. That's a 5-minute break. We will recess for just 5 minutes and be right back. Thank you.
How long are we recessing for?
5 minutes. Thank you for that clarification, Senator.